People often bring up faith, belief, and scripture when we talk about what matters most in life. And not long ago, AI was something you talked about in tech circles. Now it's entering sacred spaces too. I want us to explore together how AI is being used in religious research and practice, how factual or inclusive it tends to be, where bias shows up, and even what might happen if people start creating their own religions or deities using AI. I'll start by walking you through some real, recent examples of AI in religious settings, what people are doing, what reactions they've had, and what we can learn. A particularly striking case is from Lucerne, Switzerland. At St. Peter's Chapel, there was an installation called Deus in Machina, an avatar of Jesus powered by AI that could converse in 100 languages. Visitors were invited into a confessional booth to ask questions of this AI Jesus. It wasn't intended to replace confession or pastoral care, but to experiment with what people would ask, how meaningful their interactions might be. Some found the experience deeply spiritual. Others felt the responses were superficial or repetitive. After 2 months and over 1,000 conversations, the church decided not to make it permanent, citing concerns over responsibility for what the AI might say. Not far from that, in Finland, a church service was created almost entirely by AI. Sermons, music, visuals, even avatars of pastors and historical figures reading scripture. Attendance was higher than usual for a weeknight. It was an experiment, and while many appreciated it, others felt it lacked warmth and the human touch that communities expect. Thinking back further, there's Mindar, a Buddhist android preacher in Kyoto. It gives sermons programmed by monks, not generative or fully interactive, but an early example of technology used in ritual context. The android moves, gestures, delivers the Heart Sutra sermons, reflecting tradition and robotics together. Having looked at examples, let's consider how factual and inclusive AI tends to be when it deals with religious content. Researchers have studied how AI models represent religions, both in text generation and image generation. One paper, Religious Bias Landscape in Language and Text-to-Image Models, systematically tested hundreds of prompts and found that there are indeed stereotypes and biases. Religions are represented unequally. Some religions appear with more negative associations. Some are more positively framed, depending on the model. Another recent work called Sacred or Secular. Religious bias in AI-generated financial advice looked at ChatGPT and found that about half of the financial advice responses examined showed religious bias. For example, advice was tailored differently when the AI assumed client and advisor shared the same religion or included religious framing that might alienate people of other faiths. There's also research into how AI influences religious education. A study, Cognitive Bias in Generative AI Influences Religious Education, observed that when students use AI-generated religious content, it sometimes amplifies existing preconceptions and biases, depending on the sources used, and may influence understanding of doctrine in ways that align with dominant narratives rather than minority or dissenting ones. We should also see how certain religions are emotionally portrayed. A study, Divine Lamas, Bias, Stereotypes, Stigmatization, and Emotion Representation of Religion, found that major Western religions often get more nuanced and balanced portrayals, while Eastern religions like Hinduism or Buddhism sometimes get stereotyped. Judaism and Islam tended to see more refusal to generate content or more negative emotional framing in some models. Now, as we've seen those divergences, I want to bring out some recurring points of bias and risk that have emerged from the research and from experiments with AI in spiritual spaces. One thing is that AI often reflects what is in its training data. If there is much more content in Western Christian contexts, or in English, or in particular theological traditions, then those will dominate. That means minority religions, indigenous faiths, and less well-documented interpretations often get less fidelity and may be stereotyped or simplified. Another risk is emotional or moral framing bias. AI can assign certain emotions, rigidity, fanaticism, compassion, etc., in ways that favor or stigmatize a tradition. Or it might refuse to respond or respond less fully on some topics depending on the religion involved. That can leave people feeling unheard or misrepresented. We also have to watch for factual errors or hallucinations, statements that seem confident but are incorrect, misattributed quotes, misremembered historical events, or simplified interpretations of doctrine. When AI is used for teaching, counseling, or devotional practice, such errors can mislead. Cultural context is another blind spot. Rituals, metaphors, sacred language often rely on deep local or linguistic context, nuances that AI often doesn't pick up unless finely tuned or supervised by people steeped in those traditions. Given all this, let's reflect on what might happen in the future and what we should be especially mindful of. One possibility is that people begin using AI tools not just to interpret existing religions or aid in worship, but to create their own religious narratives, deities, avatars. As with the AI Jesus, people might make chatbots or avatars of gods, prophets, divine beings customized to their beliefs or preferences. Some might be purely artistic or personal, others might try to gain followers. That raises deep questions. Who writes the doctrine of such a new deity? Who curates its moral framework? What accountability is there if such an AI deity gives harmful advice or misguides someone? Could these creations fragment understanding of tradition or alter how people view religious authority and sacred texts? To finish, I want us to hold in mind both the promise and the caution. AI in religious contexts can help researchers preserve texts, make religious education more accessible, give people new ways to reflect on faith, maybe even foster interfaith understanding. But it is not neutral. It carries bias, risk of misrepresentation, possibility of error. And spiritual life involves more than facts. It involves mystery, relationship, emotion, community. If you're ever engaging with AI in a spiritual or religious way, ask yourself, who made this tool? Whose voices were included or excluded? How do I verify its claims? How do I maintain the human, ethical, relational component? Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you ever interact with an AI deity or avatar? Would you trust its spiritual guidance? What do you worry about, and what excites you when you think of AI's role in religion?